Okay, just a quick question sort of before I get to the swing of things. Does everyone have a copy of the two sheets, the double slide? In terms of introducing myself further, I mean, I've already had a very excellent introduction, so thank you kindly for that. But I graduated in 2012, so a while back, but not that long ago as well. And since then, I did an undergraduate degree at UWA. That's a 4-year undergraduate degree with honours. And then I spent 9 months getting a qualification in secondary education. I did win an offer, it did. And since then, I did a 1-year master's degree at the University of Cambridge, which I've just finished. If you're paying close attention to my get-up today, you can see my little alumnus pin, which I'm very, very proud to wear, and which is sort of an arrogant thing to do, but what I'll be doing at the end of this year, starting in October, is I'll be starting a PhD at Cambridge, researching Australian literature. I'd love to talk about that today, but I'm going to sort of keep a lid on that and instead focus on something that's actually relevant and interesting to you. And that specific thing is the paper 1 of your examination, which I believe is beginning to loom. If you're not getting that sensation already, then you probably should have it kind of kicking in over the course of this lecture, because it's sooner than you think. In terms of content of the lecture, the challenge of this lecture was to think about a way of knitting together lit and Langlit in a manner that wasn't sort of wholly redundant for one group. So what I did was I went and had a careful look at the marking criteria for both paper 1s. Obviously this is a slightly incomplete marking criteria for Langlit. I apologise for that. It cuts off on the page. I figure we don't quite need to see the top end. The bit that I'm most interested in is this component here. Why am I interested in this component? Well, it's actually very, very, very similar indeed. It's under a slightly different heading. We've got appreciation of the writer's choices versus understanding of the use and effects of stylistic features. But this particular bullet point is really quite similar across both. The key point that I'm getting at here is that there's the sense of the candidate needs to be able to show appreciation of the writer's choices of language, structure, technique, and style. Much the same here with the addition of tone. So if I can sum up the purpose for today's lecture, I want to give you an introduction, I want to do some modelling for you, to a passage in terms of how best to extract these elements for your examination. Okay? What to say further? The first thing that I will just say is I want to give you a brief little bit of history of the paper 1. I want to give you a sense of where that paper actually comes from and why it's worthwhile doing that. The paper 1, or the style of the paper 1, is actually historically relatively recent. The practice of sort of taking a passage, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, literary fiction or non-literary fiction, the practice of taking a single passage, sort of cutting away its context and presenting it to you in isolation, is a practice that actually only dates back roughly to the beginning of the 20th century. It actually, most famously, dates back to a book published in 1929, written by a guy named I.A. Richards, and that book is called Practical Criticism. Practical Criticism. I.A. Richards is actually a professor at Cambridge, and this book is a sort of experiment in itself. What the book does is it gave a series of Cambridge undergraduates excerpts, passages, short poems, with the name of the author and the title stripped away. So the idea is they were doing something quite similar in sort of the 1920s to what you are doing now, in the sense that they've given a passage without the context and told make something of this. That experiment for Richards was partially a failure. He felt that there were a set of sort of things that candidates were consistently doing wrong, and he documents those in Practical Criticism. You might be delighted, or you might be disappointed, to learn that things that he documents in Practical Criticism are much the same as the things that come up in examiners' reports today. So there's a positive or a negative to that. Either you're all as good as first-year undergraduates in the 1920s, which is great, congratulations for that, that's a huge achievement. Or, inversely, you sort of haven't gotten any better, and we need to improve. I apologise for that, we'll endeavour to improve your results today. Okay, I told you that because I want to give you a sense of the purpose behind this paper. The idea behind Richard's model was to make criticism into something quite systematic. Prior to Richards, you had this guy named Arthur Quiller Couch, and he was sort of famous for giving lectures that were just evocations. They weren't really about anything. They were just sort of discussions in the most vague and general sense, roughly around the author, with little relation to the text. What Richards was trying to do is make literature something quite scientific, give people a method, give them a way of understanding the text. And I think that scientific focus is part of what I wanted to sort of introduce to you today. There's actually quite a kind of systematic way you can go about paper one, and if you're clear, structured, and direct about it, you can pretty consistently get the result that you're looking for. So, again, just returning to this point. That's okay. It's all right, no rush. Don't worry, it's a bit warm. Yes. But again, in terms of key points, it's this business of language, structure, technique, and style. Those are sort of the 5 prongs we want to think carefully about today. I should also mention that I'm aware for the language students that the content of your paper one is quite different, and you explicitly get non-literary texts, and I believe you won't get anything like a novel or poetry. You'll generally get you get things like a blog post, possibly, an excerpt from a biography. Am I right in that? I haven't taught the language course, so I don't know that intimately, but that's the sense that I have.
So HL students can get those literary texts.
Sure, okay. So HL
but not
students
SL.
Also. Well, good. I mean, I spent a lot of time sort of agonizing over this and thinking of a way to sort of balance it for you. And what I did in the end was I got you an excerpt. This is the prose excerpt that I'm giving you. I got you an excerpt that is, it's complicated. It has a complicated publication history. Published as a short story, but it was also published as part of an autobiography. So I think it straddles the line between genres in quite interesting ways. It is quite literary stylistically, I would say, but it is still a useful resource for you to think about even if you are doing lang-led. So I hope that you will accept my attempt to sort of balance between the different courses. It is the best effort I could put forward. It's a tricky one to find a passage that sort of suits everybody. Yes, but what I would like to do for the remainder of this session is just give you a sense of sort of methodology and how best to approach these passages. What that means, in short, is having a reasonably careful read of that first passage. I'll read this aloud, because I think it's worthwhile. I also would like to formally apologise for my French pronunciation. It is not good. If we have any excellent French speakers in the room, I'm happy to sort of defer authority, and they can read the French bits. That would be a huge boon for the knowledge report. I can say plage, that's about it. So here we go. This is the excerpt that I'm giving you. This is First Love by Vladimir Nabokov, who incidentally I've written my master's dissertation on, so I know him quite well. On the browner and wetter part of the plage, that part which at low tide yielded the best mud for castles, I found myself digging one day, side by side with a little French girl called Colette. She would be 10 in November. I had been 10 in April. Attention was drawn to a jagged bit of violet mussel shell, upon which she had stepped with the bare sole of her narrow, long-toed foot. No, I was not English. Her greenish eyes seemed flecked with the overflow of the freckles that covered her sharp-featured face. She wore what might now be termed a playsuit, consisting of a blue jersey with rolled-up sleeves and blue knitted shorts. I had taken her at first for a boy, and then had been puzzled by the bracelet on her thin wrist and the corkscrew brown curls dangling from under her sailor cap. She spoke in bird-like bursts of rapid twitter, mixing governess English and Parisian French. 2 years before, on the same plage, I had been much attracted to the lovely, sun-tanned daughter of a Serbian physician. But when I met Colette, I knew at once this was the real thing. Colette seemed to me so much stranger than all my other chance playmates at Biarritz. I somehow acquired the feeling that she was less happy than I, less loved. A bruise on her delicate, downy forearm gave rise to awful conjectures. He pinches as bad as my mummy, she said, speaking of the crab. I evolved various schemes to save her from her parents, who were des bourgeois de Paris. Sorry. As I heard somebody tell my mother with a slight shrug, I interpreted the disdain in my own fashion, as I knew that those people had come all the way from Paris in their blue and yellow limousine, a fashionable adventure in those days, but had doubly sent Colette with her dog and governess by an ordinary coach train. The dog was a female fox terrier with bells on her collar and the most waggly behind. From sheer exuberance, she could lap up salt water out of Colette's toy pail. I remember the sail, the sunset, and the lighthouse pictured on that pail, but I cannot recall the dog's name, and this bothers me. During the 2 months of our stay at Biarritz, my passion for Colette all but surpassed my passion for butterflies. Since my parents were not keen to meet hers, I saw her only on the beach, but I thought of her constantly. If I noticed she had been crying, I felt a surge of helpless anguish that brought tears to my own eyes. I could not destroy the mosquitoes that had left their bites on her frail neck, but I could, and did, have a successful fistfight with a red-haired boy who had been rude to her. She used to give me warm handfuls of hard candy. One day, as we were bending together over a starfish, and Colette's ringlets were tickling my ear, she suddenly turned toward me and kissed me on the cheek. So great was my emotion that all I could think of saying was, "You little monkey." I had a gold coin that I assumed would pay for our elopement. Where did I want to take her? Spain? America? The mountains above Paris? If a French speaker wants to chime in at this stage, please be my guest. This is going to be slightly disastrous, but I'll try. Là-bas, là-bas, dans la montagne, as I had heard Carmen sing at the opera. One strange night, I lay awake, listening to the recurrent thud of the ocean and planning our flight. The ocean seemed to rise and grope in the darkness, and then heavily fall on its face. Of our actual getaway, I have little to report. My memory retains a glimpse of her obediently putting on rope-soled canvas shoes on the lee side of a flipping tent, while I stuffed a folding butterfly net into a brown paper bag. The next glimpse is of our evading pursuit by entering a pitch-dark cinema near the casino, which, of course, was absolutely out of bounds. There we sat, holding hands across the dog, which now and then gently jingled in Colette's lap, and were shown a jerky, drizzly, but highly exciting bullfight at San Sebastian. My final glimpse is of myself being led along the promenade by my tutor. His long legs move with a kind of ominous briskness, and I can see the muscles of his grimly set jaw working under the tight skin. My bespectacled brother, aged 9, whom he happens to hold in his other hand, keeps trotting out forward to peer at me with awed curiosity, like a little owl. Among the trivial souvenirs acquired at Biarritz before leaving, my favourite was not the small pool of black stone, and not the sonorous seashell, but something which now seems almost symbolic, a meerschaum pen holder with a tiny peephole of crystal in its ornamental part. One held it quite close to one's eye, screwing up the other, and when one had got rid of the shimmer of one's own lashes, a miraculous photographic view of the bay and of the line of cliffs ending in a lighthouse could be seen inside. And now a delightful thing happens. The process of recreating that pen holder and the microcosm in its islet stimulates my memory to a last effort. I try again to recall the name of Colette's dog, and sure enough, along those remote beaches, over the glossy evening sands of the past, where each footprint slowly fills up with sunset water, here it comes, echoing and vibrating. Floss, floss, floss. Colette was back in Paris by the time we stopped there for a day, before continuing homeward, our homeward journey. And there, in a fawn park under a cold blue sky, I saw her, by arrangement between our mentors, I believe, for the last time. She carried a hoop and a short stick to drive it with, and everything about her was extremely proper and stylish, in an autumnal, Parisian, Ennui de Ville Bourfiette way. She took from her governess and slipped into my brother's hand a farewell present, a box of sugar-coated almonds meant, I knew, sold for me. And instantly she was off, tap-tapping her glinting hoop through light and shade, around and around a fountain choked with dead leaves near which I stood. The leaves mingle in my memory with the leather of her shoes and gloves, and there was, I remember, some detail in her attire, perhaps a ribbon on the Scottish cap, or the pattern of her stockings, that reminded me then of the rainbow spiral in a glass marble. I still seem to be holding that wisp of iridescence, not knowing exactly where to fit it, while she runs with her hoop ever faster around me, and finally dissolves among the slender shadows cast on the gravel path by the interlaced arches of its low, roofed fence. Okay. There's a fair bit to process there. That isn't the full story, that's the sort of concluding segment of that short story, but I think it works quite well as a kind of self-contained piece. It works by itself. The question, of course, is how do we sort of deal with a piece like this in the space of an hour and a half or 2 hours in the case of HL students? My approach to passages like this has always been to begin with kind of extraordinary simplicity. I would strongly counsel you to recall a good thing that your teacher in year 4 no doubt taught you, which is to begin with who, what, when, where, and possibly some suggestion of why. I know I was facetious in my delivery on that, but I mean that sincerely. I think actually just starting a passage with an extremely basic question of who is in it is a really useful way of approaching it. So take a minute or two. I want to establish who the characters are in this passage. Take a minute or two, and I'll give you some time to chat with a partner and just reach a consensus. It's tricky stuff, it's careful stuff. That should be enough for a starting point. Have a chat with the person next to you and just see if you missed anything.
We have Colette, then we also have the tutor of the narrator and also his brother.
Sorry, which point in his life do you think?
Well,
Yes.
probably his child just mentioned he had just been 10 in April and that she would be 10 in November.
I suspect that's probably about enough time to reach a consensus. I'd love somebody to volunteer an answer or two. Any suggestions? Just one character as the starting point. Volunteer one character for me.
Colette.
Colette's a great starting point. Okay, good. Can we improve that answer at all? Can we give a better answer than Colette? I'm still sticking to that character, but can we give a kind of more expansive answer than Colette? She's Parisian. Great starting point. Okay. What else do we know about Colette as a sort of starting point?
She's 10.
Good. Technically, is she 10?
No, not 9.
No, would be 10. Very, very close. Okay. Do we not have the woo? Right. This is not a paper one yet. The purpose of this is we're working through evidence and detail. That's a starting point. We've got 9-year-old Parisian Colette. Okay. We could improve that answer further, but I want to leave that just for a moment. Another character in this passage. Narrator. Yeah, good. What else do we know about the narrator?
He is 10.
He is 10, correct, yes, very good. Or rather, he had been 10 in April. For being super duper pedantic, we could maybe squeeze that and say, well, maybe he's not specifying his birthday, but that's ridiculous. Let's just go with, I had been 10 in April, he's still 10. Good, yes, okay, let's work with that. What else do we know about the narrator?
He's a boy.
He's a boy. Excellent, good. Male narrator, good starting point. Do you know anything else about him?
Compassion towards Colette.
Yeah, expresses compassion toward Colette. Certainly, a number of interesting, different ways. I appreciate that answer, it's a really good answer, but for the moment let's just stick to really basic information, because we're still in year 4 at the moment. We're still at the who, what, where, why stage. So let's just keep it to the basics. Is there anything else we can know about the narrator?
Didn't he say something along the lines of, I'm not English?
Yeah, there's a point toward that. He's certainly not English. In fact, I did mention beforehand very, very briefly that this passage was published both as a short story and as a bit of autobiography. If in paper 1 you received an extract that specified that it was autobiography, then obviously you would make the link with the first person narrator and the author's name. So you would say this first person narrator is Vladimir Nabokov, age 10. I didn't explicitly say that because it is ambiguous. It's published both as short story and as autobiography, so it sort of straddles between the two. But for the sake of clarity today, I give you all formal permission to refer to this narrator as Vladimir. This is, yeah, he is Russian, that's correct. But there is a slight tangent, and I must mention this because I read this tasteful guy. He does prefer his name pronounced Vladimir, as it rhymes with Redeemer. He is dead, long dead, so you don't have to do that. But if you really want to be fancy and fussy, then call him Vladimir rather than Vladimir. Yeah, his correct pronunciation is Vladimir Nabokov. That's how he wants his name pronounced. But you can ignore that and just call him Vladimir, it's easier. Good. Okay, so we've got some details about the narrator. What about other characters? We picked the two biggest ones. Minor characters?
His brother.
His brother? Yeah, do we know much about his brother?
Only mentioned once.
He's only mentioned once, yeah. Have we get age for the brother?
No.
No, that's right. Good. Again, this is just factual information, but it's just the building blocks of the story, right? You know, we're starting off with basics, but it's just worth knowing this. We don't get much else about the brother, do we? He's quite a minor character. Is he memorably described, would you say?
He's like an owl, I think that's
I'm pushing you out of year 4 territory here, but yes, he does. He gets a sibling. He gets like an owl. Again, there's a lot we can say about the brother external to the passage, but for the moment, yes, that's the detail to focus on. What about other characters? Perhaps non-human characters? I heard something, sorry. The two families? Yeah, good. Okay. Did we get much info about the families?
parents of the prison girl, apparently.
Good. Yeah, specifically the mother of the prison girl. He pinches as bad as my mummy.
Yeah, she's
Yeah, that's right. There's an implication that the mother is sort of abusive toward Colette. That crab, he pinches as bad as my mummy. A little detail, an important little detail, nonetheless. We don't get much information about Vladimir's parents, do we? In fact, I don't get any information about that. Do you see other kind of authority figure that's carrying him in this passage? Tutor, that's right, tutor. He does have several governesses in actual historical fact as a child, but in this passage specifically it's a tutor, that's correct. Good. What else? Any other characters? I did say non-human character.
Pet dog.
The pet dog. Yeah, Floss. That's right, Floss. Specifically, Floss. And that is itself a really important detail in this passage. I will come back to why that's an important detail. At the moment we've got a list of who, okay? I think we've pretty comprehensively itemised all the characters in this passage. That's our basic building block. And I suggested to you that an important detail of that who is that name, Floss. If I was sort of doing notes for this passage, I would list those characters and I would sort of asterisk or I would earmark that name Floss as something that's clearly important to the passage that we need to come back to. But now let's skip what, and let's move to where for a second. Just establish the written basically. Where is this sort of set? Where is this passage set? Specifically? Beach spirits. Perfect. Yeah, that's the primary setting. Are there any other settings in this passage?
Parents.
Good. Yes, but just like I'm talking specific settings, so like kind of physical places. Do they go somewhere? Do Colette and young Vladimir go somewhere? The cinema. That's right, they go to the cinema as well. Again, I'm going through this not because you need all of these details to come up with a good reading of the passage, but because this sort of tick box stuff is a way of just checking with yourself to make sure you're on the right track. It's very hard to wildly misread the passage once you've accumulated all this information. Right? Once you have all this stuff in place, it's quite hard to then come up with a assertion that's just completely wrong. Okay? That's the rationale behind that. Okay, we've got a reasonable sense of where. What about a kind of a what for this story? And this is the part where the cogs really start turning. We've transcended year 4, and we're getting up to about, at least year 8 or so. We're kind of talking through what's and that sort of thing. So a sense of what goes on in this passage, what actually happens. I'm thinking plot. Is there even conflict in this passage? Well, what is the plot of this passage? Ooh, year 8 with a big arm, wasn't it? Come on. I'm sure you can do this. I have absolute confidence in each and every one of you that we can do a year 8 task. It'll be a good thing to do. What about the what?
The narrator's recollection of his interaction with young girl.
Yeah, good. Really, really good. So as a baseline, I think it's a really sensible idea just to kind of come up with a one-sentence summary of the plot of the passage, okay, in the most literal kind of possible sense. What is this passage? Well, it's kind of a recollection by the narrator of his first love, as the title suggests, of his kind of initial crush on a young girl named Colette. We can specify that further with a little bit of kind of where flourish. It's his recollection of a crush he had on a young girl named Colette while at Biarritz, while on the beach in Biarritz. Okay? So it's actually quite straightforward. We're just using that basic who and where information and bringing that together into a sentence that establishes the kind of the plot mechanism of the passage. Again, I know this is all still quite straightforward stuff, but having all of this in place is a way of ensuring that the final reading isn't a mystery. Okay? It's just stuff that you need to know, basically. But what if we want to complicate that suggestion? Let's take that basic statement and let's push it into year 9, year 10 territory. What's the next sort of step? We've got the plot summary. Well done, Mr. Urette, you get an A+. What's the next step after that? Where else can we go with this passage? If this passage is a recollection, what else is it?
The role of memory.
Yeah, great. It's a really interesting way of sort of thinking about memory. This is where we start to push into that sort of language, structure, technique, style, tone territory. To really unpack that business of what is the role of memory in this passage, I think at bare minimum we need to start thinking about style. Okay, style is a really key element of this passage, and perhaps tone as well. I'm actually not quite sure why that's left off the literature list. I think actually tone is a really important element, and I don't, I haven't read many good essays that haven't at least implicitly talked about tone at some point. I mean, tone is an enormously important kind of element of any text. So let's think about that. Let's think about style and tone for the moment. Style and tone, and how does that relate to the imagining of memory in this passage? What connection do those things have? Well, firstly, would you say this is, let's step back, let's step to year 7 territory. Let's deal in opposites, shall we? Does the person writing this have a good memory or a bad memory? Good memory. Okay, let's be further specific. Is it a good memory or a great memory? Good.
Well, it's sort of
Okay. Is it remembered? Is it remembered with such specificity that you sort of question some of the details? Or is it just generalizations about what happened? Right.
Can remember the names of dogs.
Yeah. So that's quite a specific detail. Some of the descriptions, I think, are sort of enormously specific as well. I remember the sail, the sunset, and the lighthouse pictured on that pail. I mean, on the bucket that she's carrying. That's an enormously specific recollection for somebody to have about when they were 10. So I think probably if we want to, and again, this is slightly trickier conceptual stuff, but if we want to err on that side, we'd say, okay, specific recollections rather than kind of generalizations in memory. You might also think about, if you want to sort of build upon that point, you might think about the description of the girl's body, the bare sole of her narrow, long-toed foot. Now, I can tell you with absolute certainty, I don't remember the link for anyone's toes who I knew when I was 10. So, again, I would probably go on the side of specific memory here. Okay, so this is a text that stylistically, through its use of diction, specific language, and through its use of imagery, is giving us a very specific set of recollections. So perhaps there's an imagining of memory as something you need to work at, put simply. Okay? You need to actively recollect. Memory is not just something that happens involuntarily, as it does in Proust. Memory is something that you actually need to decide to do. You need to decide to recall, and through effort you can bring things back. This perhaps leads us back to that point about the name that we asterisked earlier. We made that point that floss is an important detail in this passage. Why is floss an important detail in this passage?
It's the long form
Good. Yes, it's a flaw in the narrative memory. It's also just, put simply, it's a plot point. I can't remember this. Remembering this pen holder has led me to remember this name, floss. Okay? That's that illustration of what I was talking about. Memory, when you activate it, when you work with it, when you sit down and write a passage, you can recall new information, information that was previously lost to you. There's this sense of memory being an activated process. We might also observe that that's a structural function of the passage as well. By delaying that name, by delaying the recollection of floss, it's not recalled the first time he introduces the dog. By delaying that recollection, he kind of asserts that theme, if you want to say that, right? He introduces that theme to the passage by delaying that particular name, floss. So again, if we're thinking just in terms of building blocks, right, we've actually already moved through, we've got a sense of language. The specificity of that language is a way of thinking about memory. We've got a sense of structure as well. By delaying that particular name, there's an assertion made about what memory is, how it works, what it does. What about tone? I'll specify that beforehand. What would you say the tone of this passage is? I know that's a huge generalization to make. Quite often you prefer to talk about tone in sort of isolated instances. The tone of a given sentence, say, or the tone of a paragraph, perhaps. But if we were to make a huge generalization about the tone of this passage, what do we do there? There's a generalization about tone. Should we do the opposites thing again? That's often quite helpful. We're just kind of pinning down ideas. Let's say, okay, is the tone frustrated or tranquil? Tranquil. Okay, good. Please don't be afraid to vote. I only got a couple of tranquils there, and I would just like a sense of what everyone thinks. If you do think it's frustrated, I'd be interested to hear why that is. Okay, let's think further. If it's tranquil, is it tender or is it harsh? Tender. Okay, good. So 2 words thus far. We've got a sense of the tone as being tender, tone as being tranquil. There's actually some legitimate sort of important words you can use to think about that passage. And you can also use them to think about moments in which perhaps that tone is interrupted. That's the reason you can't make a generalization about the tone, so that you can track moments where the tone is broken or is cut short. I think one moment in which that tone not necessarily is broken but is complicated is that moment we specified before when we learned the Colette sort of abused. He pinches as bad as my mummy, she said, speaking of a crowd. What would you say the tone of that section is? Is that a break from perhaps that tranquil tone? Is that sentence tranquil or not? So tranquil is like calm, relaxed, serene. But is that sentence calm, relaxed, serene? It's not exactly outraged. It's not he pinches as bad as my mummy, she said, speaking of a crab, which I found deplorable. You know, it's not that sort of that assertion, right? It's a statement of fact. But it's quite a reserved statement of fact. It almost voices it without voicing an opinion. It leaves us to sort of to make a judgment about that. I think that's an important element of the tone, right? There's not the sense of a kind of narrator commenting on the past, so much just relating the past to us. Okay, there's explanation. Well, no, there isn't so much explanation as description. Description over explanation, I think, is a key kind of concept for this passage. So again, if we're thinking in terms of our techniques, we started to think through style as well on that point. But the key ones we've picked so far were good, pretty clear sense of language, some sense of structure, some sense of tone. Technique is a huge term that actually encompasses a multitude of different terms. But if you had to think about, say, 3 major techniques for this passage, what are the sort of the most obvious devices or techniques for this passage? Imagery. Imagery is a huge one. Yeah, absolutely a huge one. Of course, with imagery, I always tell Benji this, please always append a descriptive term or an adjective to imagery. Imagery is a massive, massive term. You know, I was using imagery just then when I said imagery is a massive, massive term. Imagery can sort of mean almost anything. Think about senses is always a good starting point for imagery. Okay? So what do you hear? Well, if you're hearing something, it's auditory imagery. What about if you're smelling something? If you're smelling something, it's often olfactory imagery. It's the fancy word you can use. Or you could just say, if you're feeling slightly year 9, you could say imagery of smell is a fine way to start off. Yeah. What about imagery of sort of touch, of objects, of hold? Is there a word for that? Tactile. Tactile is a good word for that. Again, I won't run you through all the senses, but that's a good way of beginning to think about imagery in a given passage, and perhaps a key way of doing so. What about other devices in this passage? You've got a sense of imagery. What else? Imagery is a sort of main or major device. Imagery is a major device. What's another major device in this passage? I perhaps didn't kind of exaggerate this as much as I could have when I was reading. But if you listen carefully, you can really hear the sound devices in this passage as well. Did anyone else get a sort of a sense of that? Repeated sounds across words? Her greenish eyes seem to reflect with the overflow of the freckles that covered her sharp-featured face. Yeah, definite sense of consonance there as well. So in terms of sound devices, I mean, there's some division you can do here. the most basic kind of unit of sound device, the imagery of sound devices is a kind of alliteration. That's the big bracket term. Then you can break alliteration up, right? You can divide alliteration into something like assonance and consonance. You can be much more specific than that as well if you want. You can talk about sort of susurrus sound, you can talk about plosive as well. But let's just stick to assonance and consonance. Do you know the difference between those two? Assonance versus consonance. It's actually, it's in the word itself. Assonance starts with the letter A, which is a vowel. Okay, assonance is a repetition of vowel sounds. Consonance starts with the letter C, consonants, and that's the repetition of consonant sounds, i.e. non-vowels, so pretty straightforward. That example with sort of flipped freckles, that's an instance of consonants rather than of assonance. Yeah, the letter F, as we're all aware, is not a vowel, is in fact a consonant. That's the key term that I perhaps used to discuss there. In terms of big features, that's why we've got a sense of imagery, and that's why we've also got a sense of sort of alliteration as our broad features that are really important to this passage. This is all coming out of that banner of technique, by the way. The sense of technique, of the writer's technique choices. What about a third technique? A third technique in this passage. We've talked about imagery, we've thought about alliteration. Is there a third technique? A third sort of major one you want to talk about? Structure, yeah. I'm trying to sort of to do each of these separately if possible. Structure is an important thing to talk about in this passage, but if we think about sort of techniques as things that happen at almost the word or sentence level, right? Whereas structure is kind of the architecture of the piece, like what order the paragraphs in is the most basic question of structure. What about, think about a third sort of technique? Is there a third technique we could talk about here? Again, I'm encouraging you to think about sort of some quite basic things here. So if the first point was about imagery, broadly, and the second point was about how words sound, the third thing to think about might be something like sentence length. I know that's really basic and straightforward, but like sentence length and sentence structure. So how long are the sentences? How many words are there per sentence? And where are the commas? I think actually that element is the way that you create this quite often. That sense of how long are the sentences and where are the pauses is actually perhaps the most important element of tone. You can often use quite angry words, but if you punctuate them correctly, they can sound very relaxed. That's what passive aggressiveness is. I think perhaps a neat example of that syntax might just be that first isolated sentence. On the browner and wetter part of the plage, that part which at low tide yielded the best mud for castles, I found myself digging, one day, side by side with a little French girl called Colette. That sentence has a clear narrative function, it establishes setting and character, but it also has a really important tonal function as a result of the syntax, as a result of that sentence length structure and order of words in the sentence. Okay? Those commas give it this sort of recollective air, this sense of gentleness, perhaps, and this sense of it being quite a kind of a meditated phrase, or not ponderous, but sort of contemplative. It's a recollection. The author is not in a hurry. They're thinking carefully about each word in the sentence and they're giving us the requisite details. This is not a story in which the author or the narrator, I think, is actively trying to hide information from us. There's a sense that certain details aren't given kind of full prominence. This is not a story which is trying to be tricky. It gives us a pretty clear overview in that first sentence. So again, just to sum up sort of where we've gone so far, we've thought about language in terms of specificity, right? In terms of those careful details, and the effect that has on the passage's overall treatment of memory. Okay? The passage is trying to take memory very seriously. It's trying to do something detailed and sort of there's almost impulse of preservation in this passage. Hold on to the details and preserve the memory. And that's achieved through a very specific choice of diction in many cases, and quite imaginative choice of diction, and also a sort of a wide-ranging vocabulary that seeks the exact right word. Even that word, meerschaum, is a really good example of that. Does anyone actually know what that word means? I looked it up. I'm normally good about words, but meerschaum isn't one that I've heard before. It's a fragile white clay. It's a very, very delicate, very precise word for what he's trying to describe. You could have just said white clay. What's the exact right word for that? So that specificity of diction, I think, is a really key thing to think about. In terms of sense of structure, broadly we're aware that this passage is sort of chronological, it's pretty linear. It does occasionally jump in terms of time. There's that jump around the cinema, sort of jump to the cinema, and then it does actually describe them being sort of captured by the tutor. The next scene is him sort of being led off by the tutor. There's a sense of it being linear in structure, but also very self-consciously an act of recollection. So there's a sense of, I can't remember the name of the dog now, but by the penultimate paragraph, I do remember it, and I'll tell you as much. So that sense of structure, equally, is really important to that sense of the passage is concerned with memory. In terms of tone, we talked about serenity, tranquility, carefully paced, contemplated in tone. These are all key words. But I think it's important to remember that the tone emerges from a combination of these two things. Actually, in fact, this thing as well. The tone emerges from connections between individual words, their place within the sentence, and the punctuation that sort of surrounds them. And also, of course, the length of those sentences. That's the key things that build up to the impression of tone. In terms of technique, we pinpointed 3 things. Do you remember what those 3 things are? 3 elements for technique, 3 kind of big things.
Sensory, imagery, consonants, and simple structure.
Yeah, great, excellent. And of course, the huge idea is imagery. And the more specific versions are things like tactile imagery, olfactory imagery. Don't say visual imagery, that feels like a bit of a tautology. It's just visual imagery is sort of saying the same thing twice. But yes, specific kind of branches of imagery, absolutely. Then we had that point about alliteration as well, divided up into assonance and consonants. So there's 2 different kinds of sound device. They used to be called front rhyme, which I actually think is a kind of sensible name, but assonance and consonants are more specific terms. We prefer those. And the final thing we talked about under technique was a sense of syntax, okay? The order of words in a sentence and the punctuation in a given sentence. And also just the length of the sentence, okay? Quite long sentences at certain points, but carefully divided into clauses so that they're easy to follow, and there's a clear sense of plot and structure still at play. So that's our sort of tick box for tone, technique, and style. We've got a reasonable sense of those from the passage. So what we've done is we've got a sense of, okay, character, tick. We've got a sense of location, tick. We've got a sense of what, tick. We've got a sense of technique per the marking criteria. If you're thinking about just sheer amount of information, you're doing quite well in criterion B at the moment. If we were to jump back to grade 4, the final thing that our lovely grade 4 teacher is missing from us is that why. And this is, of course, the hardest step. I know I said we were in grade 4. We've actually probably jumped up back to year 12 now. We're finally home. Say Kansas. We're finally home in year 12, and we're looking for that sense of why now. We've got all the building blocks, all the materials there, we have a reasonable understanding of the passage. But what's the reading we arrive at? That's just a dramatic pause. I was just thinking that through quite carefully. Okay, I think the best way to move now is I'd like you to have a go coming up with a sentence, between 1 and 2 sentences that sum up a reading you could offer for this passage, or kind of interpretation in your first sentence you could offer of it. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that and then just discuss it with a partner, and then I'll hear back from you. Have a go with that, please. I mean, very biased. It's completely
Did you say you did or was it?
1977.
77. Okay, so.
All these things, the complicated, late modernist, as he called himself, and then post but also sort of lines.
Is this in translation?
No, this is
This is English.
which is outstanding.
Ah.
This was a very translation.
Who's reading more of this man?
I'll send you some stuff.
It's Russian like. That's extraordinary.
The first time I was saying is in Russian, and then he switches over to English. He's like, oh, I'm so bad at English. Here we go.
Yeah. What's the
French.
Yeah.
Which one is actually Okay, how do we do at our meeting? We've got a sentence and a half, that's all good. Any volunteers want to share a reading, feeling particularly brave? Very brave, excellent. How do we go?
So, my thought was, because you already have memory flaws,
Yeah.
because you can't remember the name of the dog too well, he doesn't want to forget anymore, and that's why he writes a short story to remember it later time when he gets it on.
Excellent. Okay, so what I quite like about that is I like the sensitivity in that reading to the text genre. So the fundamental assertion there is something like short story as mode of preservation. You can forgive me, paraphrase. I think that's quite a compelling idea, and I can see you quite easily getting an hour's worth of essay out of that. I mean, just in terms of timing, if you're at SL, you're thinking, okay, 15, 20 minutes of planning, and the remainder of the time sort of writing the paper. If you're at HL, I'd probably take a full half hour to planning, because you have 2 hours, and then an hour and a half to write the paper. The trick is to write an assertion that gives you scope, gives you enough scope to sort of, to write a full essay, in essence. So the idea that the short story here is a mode of preserving a memory, I think that's an idea that's big enough for you to write a full essay on it. Just a quick sort of structural note. I would generally try and structure your thesis statement, so the first or perhaps second sentence if you want to write like a hook. I'd structure those in a pretty formulated way. I'd always start those off by with a kind of author's name, and then introduction of the title, text, and the genre. So for me, I would always start a thesis statement saying something like, Vladimir Nabokov's short story, First Love, comma, and then an assertion. Ted Hughes' poem, The Hawk and the Rain, comma, assertion. It's a way of just sort of ticking the boxes. You tell the market you've read the material, you know what the title of the text is, you know who the author is, and also you know what the genre of the text is. Obviously the genre is slightly complicated in this case, but just phrasing that clearly and starting off with that assertion I think is a really effective way of just ticking boxes, basically. And yeah, that engagement with the text genre is a really useful point. Did anyone have a slightly different thesis statement? Different idea? Yeah.
I felt it was quite, you could discuss this as a discussion of loss.
Yeah. Good. Excellent. Yeah. I would push you on that. I'd say, okay, great, but let's be a little bit more specific. What kind of loss are we talking about here?
Well, he spends a vast majority of the passage discussing his memories with Chloette, only for it all to be taken away in the last paragraph of the text. So you can almost interpret that as a discussion of what it feels like to lose something that you love.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the title is First Love. Perhaps it's closer to First Loss. We want to go with that. Yes, I think that's a reasonable way of approaching this passage. I think perhaps if you're looking to really sort of push the envelope with some of the language, you might think about the idea of sort of a mourning for a memory. Can you sort of grieve over a memory because it is something that is ended? The definition of memory is something that's no longer occurring. So you might want to think about the idea of sort of mourning for a memory. That might be a neat thesis statement. Vladimir Nabokov, in his short story, comma, First Love, comma, Vladimir Nabokov mourns over the recollection of his first crush in Biarritz at the age of 10 years old. Full stop. That just kind of gives you the requisite information, and is also quite a provocative assertion. I think trying to package as much information as you can into that first sentence, sort of squeezing in details about setting, character, age, I think that's quite a good way of approaching any thesis statement. It just shows a detailed knowledge of the text. Sorry, Jeff. further suggestions.
Can you use two assertions in one essay?
It depends. If they're completely unrelated, I would encourage you not to do so. Look, the key way to think about a thesis statement is to think of a thesis statement as a promise that you're making to the marker. Okay? The thesis statement is basically you saying, in this essay, I give you my personal guarantee that I will prove this point. If you make a ridiculous promise, a promise that's too large for an essay, then it's possible for you to follow through. And you have my sympathy that you won't have markers. They will crush you for that. So if the two assertions are sort of interrelated, and you can deal with them in the scope of an hour or so, then I guess that's a great idea. Sometimes in general, you'll have an idea that's adequately complex that you need two sentences to unpack it, or to explain it. That idea about perhaps mourning in memory, that might be a good example of an idea that does actually need perhaps two sentences just to be fully explained. So that answered your question, okay? Another thesis statement. It's about our ending point of this lesson. What further thesis statement or further suggestion about this passage? I mean, I hate to be sort of grim, but I must notice that most of the suggestions thus far have sort of been not morbid, but perhaps a little bit sort of morose. There's been a little bit of, yeah, this is a sad passage. What about the idea of sort of bliss in this passage, or joy? I mean, I think if nothing else, this is a passage that really delights in language. You know, this is a passage that loves words and that is obsessed with the sort of the capacity of words to do things, to do incredible things. Did anyone sort of register some of that in their thesis statement? Any sense of what this passage can do positively? Yeah.
Well, it ends up being negative, but just the way that we romanticise the past.
Yeah, a really good assertion, actually, the idea of kind of romanticising the past. And of course, as you point out, that does sort of end up with a sort of a state of mourning or a sense of loss or a sense of the tragedy of things that no longer are. But that term romanticise the past, I think, is a good one. And it's linked to the idea of sort of preservation as well. If we were to sort of just sum up two readings, I think that at the moment we're teetering on this idea of preservation. Preservation a good thing? Is preservation a successful thing? Is preservation a delightful or a blissful thing? Or is preservation an ultimately kind of sad thing? Do we successfully preserve, and then that reminds us of what is no longer? Or do we preserve in a way that actually accomplishes something? That's perhaps the key question for that passage. And I think a useful question, indeed. Okay. Is there anything else anyone would like to suggest about this passage?
You could potentially read into it and say it's the failure of language in the preservation of memory.
Yeah,
Like,
it's an interesting idea.
regardless of the complex diction, he still, end of the day, disjointed from his memory. He can't fully retain what happened, what occurred.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's something about melancholy in that final sentence as well. You know, while she runs with her hoop ever faster around me and finally dissolves among the slender shadows cast in the gravel path by the interlaced arches of its low looped fence. Regardless of how well described that is, that's still an act of dissolving. You know, at the end of the day, that's a vanishing. No matter how well you describe it, it still disappears. I think that's quite a compelling reading of this passage. A really useful point to think through. I'm cautious of keeping you in for too long, just by glancing toward that. I think perhaps an end point for this class might be a brief summary of what we've gone through. Again, the purpose of today's lesson was to sort of get you to think carefully about that criteria that I've pinpointed up on the board. Okay? That criterion B sort of flickers between lang-lit and lit in quite interesting ways. That's just to you there are similarities in terms of what you're being asked to focus on. I then suggested to you a kind of a methodology or a way of approaching paper one. It begins in grade 4, very, very simply, with a kind of who, what, when, where, why type scenario, and then it moves in kind of progressive stages up toward these more complex stylistic features and choices. Once you've built all this stuff for yourself, once you've got those notes on character, on setting, on basic plot in a given passage, and then once you've got those carefully annotated identifications of various techniques, and some notes on the writer's style, some sense of language and structure, only once you've assembled that information do I encourage you then to write a reading. I hope your sense today was that writing that interpretation, writing that first sentence, is a much less daunting task once you've assembled all that info. For me at least, the reading almost comes quite naturally once all that info is in place. if you try and do it without establishing that info, it can be very, very difficult. If you actually take the time to set that up, you make it like in place for your reading. Are there any further questions about what we've gone through today? Any queries? Okay. I think there will be some further lectures. I'm doing another lecture this afternoon on Blake specifically, and those lectures will be quite kind of content focused. This has been a methodological lecture, if anything. So I will ask you, if there are any further questions, to sort of confine them to methodology, if possible. Are there any sort of concerns that you have about paper one more broadly? About practice?
Would you recommend planning more than half an hour?
In
How
general.
45 minutes?
Yeah, I would try and keep it to half an hour. And I would also try and be reasonably decisive in terms of the passages that you actually choose. I think the passages are often of quite comparable merit. I don't think there's a sort of winner passage and a loser passage. And I've heard horror stories of students that get 15 minutes into planning one and then start planning another and go, well, actually you probably had a pretty good basis there, maybe don't throw that away. I think be decisive with the passage and then give yourself a pretty strict half an hour. That's half an hour specifically on the passage. You need a little bit more time to tinker with the structure and the order of your paragraphs, and that's acceptable. Yes,
How exactly would you structure your essay? Would you structure out the themes that you picked up on, or would you?
Yeah, this is a really good question, actually. I meant to speak about this. This is an excellent point. What I would encourage you to do is to do a sort of combined arms structure. What people normally will try and do in paper one is they'll either structure sort of by technique or they'll structure by theme. I actually think the best thing to do is to sort of to do both if you can. I don't think they're so easily separable. Certain techniques or certain elements, or certain of these stylistic features are actually closely stuck to certain things. I mean, you can't talk about, bliss or mourning in this passage. That can be about tone, right? Like you can't divide those two things from each other. You can't really talk about memory and kind of the positive capacity of memory, that sense of recalling the dog's name as a moment of joy or delight. You can't talk about that without talking about structure, okay? Because that moment is actually delayed. So my answer to you then is I would say, yes, divide up along the lines of theme and think about how each theme is closely associated with a certain technique. Okay, I don't think they're so easily separable. That was the method that I used when I did this exam in Year 12, and I found it was very successful for me, and I strongly encourage you to have a go with that. Yeah, an important thing to do. If there are any further questions, perhaps quickly take them, but if not, I know you have to get off from the class, so I'll happily bid you all adieu. Excellent, thanks very much.
Can we share an appreciation?